this tutorial, you will learn everything related to TanStack Query, formerly known as React Query. After watching this video, I guarantee that you will understand every concept of this library and will be able to confidently start working with it. You're going to learn all things about queries, mutations, invalidations, infinite scrolling, paginated queries, chained queries, and almost any concept in this amazing featureful library. So let's get started. To get started, we need to create a simple React project using Vite. We choose React here, TypeScript SWC, and that's it. After we initialize our project, we need to install our dependencies using npm install, and after that we need to install our required packages and other dependencies. First of all, we need an HTTP client. We're using Axios here, the TanStack library itself, and also its Devtools. And also we're gonna install React Hook form to create just a very simple form for our project. Hit enter. After that, our package is installed successfully. We need to also install a very simple dev dependency for our project. It's called TanStack ESLint plugin query. Don't forget to add the flag to install it as dev dependency for our project. This plugin or other ESLint plugins help us to create better code and write better projects. Hit enter. By now our package.json file must look something like this, and also note that I'm using Node version 20 here. Then we need to configure our ESLint file here. Open your ESLint file, then paste this line here to make our project know about the ESLint plugin library that we just installed for TanStack. Also, we need to put TanStack Query plugin in the plugins array, and that's it. That's the setup for our project here. So let's get started. But before we continue, please do not forget to like and subscribe, as it really helps my career on YouTube to continue. Now open the index.css file, remove all the content inside it to make things simpler, then go to app.tsx, then remove all of it and just put app here to make sure our app is working. Also delete this user state and also redundant imports and these app.css here. Run the project here, and as you can see, our app is running successfully. To understand that how this library is gonna help us is to create a very simple GET request in our application, the old way of using it. I'm also running a very simple backend server for my application to work. You can download the whole project in the description below. As you can see here, there's a very simple script that is running this db.json file here on the port of 8080. I can access to-dos from here. I can access projects via this endpoint. Also, I can post, put, patch, and other things on this fake database. Also, I added a 500 milliseconds delay to simulate a real project, because in real world, we're gonna have a delay between our front-end application and our back-end application. So let's get back to our project here. I'm gonna create a very simple get project using Axios here, the old way of using it. I'm gonna import useEffect from React. Then inside it, I'm gonna import the Axios instance here. I'm gonna use HTTP GET method here and address of my API, HTTP localhost 8080, and the endpoint of to-dos. As you can see here, the to-dos endpoint is gonna return an array of to-dos which has the checked field, title, description, and an ID. Then I need to create a data state, data set data, and I'm going to use a user state hook from React here and then initialize it with an empty array. Then I'm going to use a response here to set my data with the response data. And also I'm gonna any error like this, I'm gonna log it on the console here, and then I'm going to show the data in my React project like this. I'm going to stringify the data here here like this. As you can see here, I have my to-dos here, but as you can see, this way of using it is not very flexible because we need to handle the error here. We need also for example, if we want to create loading state for our request, we need to also create loading states using React UseMutation Hook or other hooks. We need to handle error, refetching data, revalidating cache, and so much other boiler code here. This is a tip of the iceberg here, and if our application scale grows, it's a nightmare to handle all these requests, caching, revalidating, mutating the server state, and more. But TanStack Query library is here to rescue us. For better organization, I'm going to create a services folder here. Then I'm gonna put all logic related to the data fetching in this folder. First of all, I'm going to create an API.ts file here, and in this file, I'm going to talk with my backend server. Imagine that my backend application has an endpoint that returns all the IDs of all to-dos. We're gonna use const get to-dos IDs here. This is an async function because it must return promise here. Also, don't forget to export this function from this file. Then inside the curly braces, I'm going to return a promise. But for better organization, I'm going to create base URL for my backend server here, which is localhost 8080. And also, to not repeat myself every time that I'm going to use Axios, I'm going to create a very simple Axios instance here. Const Axios instance is equal to Axios dot, let me import the Axios here, Axios dot create. For base URL argument, I'm going to put this base URL that I defined here. Then inside the get to do's IDs function, I'm going to use await Axios instance dot get. And if you remember that our backend returns a to-do like this. It has checked title, description, ID fields. I'm just gonna copy an example of it here. Then inside my application, in the src folder, I'm going to create another folder called types here for better organization. Then inside that, I'm going to create a todo.ts file. And inside that, I'm going to export an interface called todo here, which is exactly the schema of my backend project to do. The check is in Boolean type, title is string, description is also string, and the ID also is number. It might be optional. I'm going to explain it in a second. And this promise is going to return an array of the to-dos that we just defined here. Inside the URL, we need to put the to-dos endpoint here. I'm going to put parentheses around this await here, dot data, which is a response of our backend here. And then I'm going to map over the data here like this. And then for each item or to-do here, let me just change it to to-do here for you to better understand. I'm going to return the to-do.id here. This function is going to return something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Just a quick tip, just so you know, always use Axios rather than using the native JavaScript fetch API, because the Axios throws errors for unsuccessful HTTP call automatically, but fetch don't. Just keep that in mind. Now we can use this function in our application to get the to-dos IDs of our backend server. But we cannot just simply use this get to-dos IDs function in our application. We need to use the TanStack library. Again, for better organization, I'm going to create another file called queries.ts here. Inside this file, I'm going to write my application query functions. For example, if I'm going to use the to-dos IDs in my application, I cannot simply just use this function in my application. I need to create something between my application and my API responses to handle caching, revalidating errors, loading states, pending states, and much more. So inside this file, I'm going to export a simple hook called use to-dos IDs. And inside it, I'm going to return a use query hook from the TanStack React Query library. Inside this object, we can pass many options and configs here. But at minimum, we need to put the query key and query function here. I'm going to explain you in a second. query key is equal to to-dos, and also our query function is equal to get to-dos IDs, the function that we just described here. Just forgive my mistake, I must use function here. As you can see here, we use query key and query function. The query function always must return a promise. As you can see here, we're returning a promise from this function, and the data, which is obvious, it's an array of numbers, array of IDs here. And the TanStack library is intelligent enough to guess the types of the return of the function. As you can see here, the type is an array of numbers and also undefined, because it's intelligent enough to guess that the server might not respond. The server might not respond us with the data, and in that situation our data is gonna be undefined. But what is this query key here? We can put anything in this query key here. For example, I can put IDs here, to do or to-dos, but it must be something that you remember it very well, because we use this key to revalidate our query here. What does it mean? Imagine that in your application, you create another to-do and you expect that your old list of to-dos refetch again. But your application is not smart enough to guess the behavior like this. We need to somehow tell our application to refetch that query. I'm going to explain you this query here in detail in the mutation section. Also, we have another options here. For example, you can use refetch on window focus to false because the query will always be fetched if the user loses focus from browser, from your project. For example, if he goes to another tab, then returns to your project, the query will again be fetched. Also, we can enable and disable this query here using enabled property here, which it can be false or true. Or for example, you can pass something here. For example, it's an boolean, and then we put it here, and if it is true, then the query is enabled, and otherwise it's not. Just remove it for simplicity here, and remove these. This is our first query in the project. Then we need to head over to our app.tsx file, remove all these codes, we do not need them, remove redundant import, and also this here. Inside my app.tsx file, I'm gonna use a React component here called to-dos. I did not create it yet. So inside our src folder, I'm going to create another folder called components here. Then inside it, I'm going to create a file called todo.tsx here, which is a React component here, export default function, and it's going to return nothing at this moment, but we need to use the query that we just wrote there. So const to-dos IDs query is equal to use to-dos IDs that we just defined there. This simple query has so many features and options that I can use in my application. If you see it, you can see I have the data here. I can check if there is an error or not. Is my query fetched? Is a query fetching? Is loading? Is my query paused? Is my data stale? Is a query successful? And many more options. To use them, for example, I want to know whether my query is loading or not. If my query dot is pending, then I'm going to return the loading here. We can use it in another way like this. Instead of is pending, I'm going to use status is equal to pending success or error, but I prefer this syntax much more. Or if my to-dos has an error, I'm going to show a message to the user which there is an error. Now the library is intelligent enough, the TypeScript knows that if a query is not pending or is not in error state, then it must be in success phase. Now at this point of my application, I know that always I will have the data here. So I can map over my data like this, to-dos query dot data dot map to do. No, ID here, and inside that I'm going to show simple paragraph, which inside is the ID of the to-do. I'm going to use the ID as a key here, but if we head over to the browser to see our application, we see that it's not working because we forgot to initialize our application with a query client. It's very simple. Just open your main.tsx file here, and we need to wrap our app component inside the query client provider like this. Query client provider here, put your application here, then import it like this. Query client provider, this package here. Also I need query client itself. And also I'm going to import the React Query Devtools, which is a very powerful tool to debug your queries and mutations. I'm going to import it from this. Then I need to create a simple query client like this. Query client is equal to new query client like this. And also I can change the default config here. For example, I can use default options here. Then inside it, for my queries, for example, I can change the retry count from 3 to 5. Because by default, React Query tries your request 3 times if an error occurs. For example, I can change it to 5. If requests to the server fail, the TanStack will retry it for 5 times to make sure that there's nothing missing out. Also, I can change the retry delay here. For example, I can change it to 1000 milliseconds and many more options. The enable that we just saw in our query that we just created. For example, refetch on window focus that we saw earlier, and so much more. We can customize our query config at the root level of our application. After that, we need to pass this query client inside the query client provider like this. Also, do not forget to put React Query Devtools here, and also pass the prop initial is open to false because we do not want to open these Devtools every time that we open our browser. Then head over to the app.tsx file here and import the to-do here. And as you can see, if I open my backend server here, we have 2 to-dos here, one with ID 4 and one with ID 6. As you can see here, I fetched my IDs here, and then if I reload the page, first you see a loading state, which is here, and if an error occurs, you will see this message there. And if the query state is not in pending or error status, then the data will show here. As you can see, we have the ID 4 and the ID 6, and if we each time refresh the page, we see loading state and everything is handled for us with no other boilerplate code. We can also use this query like this. We're gonna use object destruction. For example, I directly get the data here. I can put it like this. Also, I can use the is pending state and is error state here like this. Then remove these redundant codes here, and that's it. But I prefer the old way of using it like this because in a file we might have several queries, and this way of doing it is not very applicable. To see our query states better, I'm going to put the query function status here, which is a to-dos query that fetches status. And as you can see here, it is in idle mode. The function that is getting our data, I'm talking about this function here, is in idle mode because this function is not running at the moment because it has fetched its data. If I refresh the page, just let me remove these codes here because we do not need them anymore. But as you can see here, because we did not specify the is pending and is error states here, the TypeScript is telling us that query might be undefined, and which is true. We can use the question mark here to tell TypeScript that we know it might be undefined, and if it is defined, use this map function over our data. As you can see, if I refresh my application, first when the application loads, we see the fetching state, which tells us that this function is running at the moment. As you can see here, it's fetching, and now it's idle. Also, we can see our query data status like this. To do ID's query dot status. As we can see, the data now is in success mode, and if I refresh the page, first the page starts, it's in pending mode. The two main difference between fetch status and status itself is that fetch status is about the function of the query, the function that is responsible for talking to the backend, which returns a promise, and also the status about the data, which is in success, pending, or error mode, and that's it. Also, we have a very simple but yet powerful hook from TanStack Query called useIsFetching hook. Calls isFetching is equal to useIsFetching, which I'm going to import it from TanStack itself, is fetching from this library, and I'm going to use it here with the name of global isFetching. As you can see, it returns a number between 0 and many queries that are fetching at the moment. It's very helpful if you want to know that your application is fetching data or not. Now, if you open your Devtools here, you can see your query here that is in a stale mode. If you open your query that we just wrote earlier, we can see that this to-dos key here is actually here. And with this amazing tool, we can see our query state. For example, if I refresh my page, you see on a start, my query is fetching. The blue indicates that our query is fetching. If I refresh again, you see that. So just close it. Then we need to head over to our application here. I just need to add ID to note that these numbers are the IDs of our to-dos. And then I want to comment these lines here. For simplicity, also I need to comment these. And that's it. This is the IDs of our to-dos. But what if we want to get each to-do completely by its ID? It's pretty simple with this library. Now that we have the IDs of to-dos, we can simply fetch each to-do one by one. How to do it? For you to see better, I just need to head over to my backend and add a few more to-dos like this. I make this ID 1, ID 2, 3, 4, just a few more. This is ID 5, 6, 7, and 8 here. Then I just made the to-dos a little more descriptive by adding title and correct description like this. I need to again run my server like this, and that's it. We head over to our application, and as you can see here, we have 8 to-dos that we just created. Just imagine that you have an API that returns a complete to-do by its ID. We just need to head over to the api.ts file, then create a simple function called getToDo here like this. It's an async function which accepts the ID of the to-do, which is a number. Then we're going to return a promise like this, await Axios instance.get. It is the type of the to-do. It's in the endpoint of to-do / I just need to use the string format like this. Then I just pass the ID like this. This endpoint return the whole to-do by its ID. Then at the end of it, I just need to put it in a brace here. Then I'm going to get the data like this. Then in our queries.ts file, I need to get the to-dos by their IDs one by one. How to do it? It's very simple with React Query. I'm going to create a simple hook like this, function use to-dos, because it's going to return our complete to-dos. Then inside the curly braces, I'm going to return use queries hook from the TanStack Query library, but import it just like this, use queries, and then that's okay. The difference between use query and use queries is that if we want to fetch multiple queries that we do not know how many of them are, we can simply use this hook. The syntax is like this. We put queries here. We need to get the IDs from our use to-dos like this, which is an array of numbers, or it may be undefined. Also, the number might be undefined too, just like this. And then we need to put the IDs here. We're going to map over it. Remove the braces here. IDs.map, and we want for each ID to do something. We put ID here is equal to open the curly braces, and we are going to return a simple query. I'm going to put query key here. Then for key, I'm going to consider to do for its name. Then I'm going to pass the ID. After that, for the query function, as you can see the pattern here, this is exactly like defining a simple query. But the difference between this hook and this hook is that this returns multiple queries. And for each query, we can use a function that we just defined, which was get to do, just like this. And we put the ID here. And by this point, we know that the ID at this point is defined. So we put exclamation mark to tell TypeScript that we know that this value is always defined. I realize that TypeScript is throwing us an error. We can simply solve it by putting the IDs in braces. In braces, then like this, we can tell if the IDs are defined, then map over them, and if not, map over an empty array. And at this point, won't do nothing. That's it. Now we head over to our React component here. Then I'm going to, let me just remove all of these for simplicity completely. Then I'm going to initialize the hook that I just wrote. To-dos queries is equal to use to-dos like this. And for its argument, as you can see here, we need to pass the list of our to-dos IDs, which is this query here, query data here. To-dos IDs, query.data. Then below it, we're going to map over it like this, .map, and this is going to return the data like this. And then inside the return of this map function, let me just put another brace here. Then we need to map over our to-dos queries like this, to-dos query.map. And for each iteration, I can get the data directly like this. Then I need to return a list item like this. Don't forget to put the key for React to work better. Data.id is my key. Then I need it to be an on-order list like this. Inside this list item, first I need to return ID of my to-do like before, data.id. Below it, I'm going to create a simple span. I'm going to use a strong HTML tag here. Then I'm going to specify the title here, and in front of it, I'm going to put the data.title like this. And simply, I'm going to add a space here. Below it, I'm going to use a strong again for description of to-do. And in front of it, again, I'm going to put data.description like this. As you can see here, our application is not working because I did a simple mistake. Go to your api.ts file. Then instead of to-do, just use to-dos here. And if you refresh your application, you can see that each to-do is going to fetch one by one and in parallel, which is very good for performance. If I refresh again my page, again, you see first the IDs are fetched. Then for each ID, as you can see, you're getting the whole to-do like this. If you want to multiple queries that you don't know how many, you can use this solution. Then I'm going to remove this here for simplicity, and that's it. Till now, we just only talked about the queries, but what if we want to add a new to-do or edit a to-do or delete a to-do? Instead of queries, we're going to use the mutation concept of TanStack Query. In this library, there are two major ways that you can communicate with your backend. One is queries and another one is mutations. When you are using queries, you want to read data from the server. But when to use mutations, when you want to change the state of the server, for example, add new item, delete new item, delete an item, or update an item. Imagine that you want to add a new to-do to your list. For better organization, again, in services folder, let me just make it bigger. You're going to create another file called mutations.ts here. Inside that, I'm going to create a simple hook like this, export function use create to-do. And the syntax is like this. We're going to return a useMutation hook from TanStack Query. Inside it, we're going to get a mutation fn or function, which gets data, which is my to-do, then do a function which I did not define it yet. So let's head over to the api.ts file here. In here, I just need to create another service for my application like this. We're going to use export const create to-do is equal to async data, which is of type todo because we are creating todo. Then inside curly braces, we're going to return anything. We just want to do something. And the TanStack library is smart enough to handle errors, success, or other states for our request or our mutation. We simply need to do something here. The thing that I want to do here is to create a to-do on my database. How? Like this. Await Axios instance.post to the endpoint of to-dos and my to-do, which is data here. Then we need to head over to our mutations. Then I'm going to create to-do like this and put the data as an argument. If you use this hook in your application, you simply will create a to-do, which is not a very special thing to do. Power of TanStack Query library is here. We can simply intercept our mutation function at any of its lifecycle. We can use onMutate here, then it returns a function, then it will do a function. For example, I can like that I'm in mutate state, which this function will run before our creating to do function. For example, we can intercept our error simply like this. If our mutation gets an error, this function will run like this. For example, I can console.log error here, then I have success here, that if your mutation is successful, this function will run like this, console.log success. And another one is onSettled. I'm going to explain you in a moment that what are these and how they can be helpful. onSettled is also to a function here like this, and then I'm going to log the console.log settle here for you to see better in a moment. Why are they useful? You can intercept your mutation in each lifecycle. For example, even before my query function starts, we can simply intercept it by using this onMutate here. Then if an error occurs, you can simply run this function here. Or if it is successful, then we can run this function, and whether it's in error state or success state, this onSettled here will always run end of your mutation. So if I head over to my application in my to-do component here, I can simply use this hook to create a new to-do like this. Const create do. Let me just const create to-do mutation here, use create to-do like this. And then I need to create a handler for it like this, a very simple handler, handle create to-do submit, because after submitting my form, which I did not create yet, I'm going to submit my form like this. I'm going to import the submit handler from React Hook form that we just installed. Then I'm going to pass my to-do interface here. Then as an argument, I'm gonna get the data from it, which is my to-do. It will make sense in a second. Then inside the curly braces, I'm going to use create mutation, create to-do mutation dot mutate, and I'm going to pass my data. Where does this data come from? If you open your mutation hook like this, you can see that inside our mutation function, you pass the data, which is of type to-do. This is exactly the thing that you pass on mutate function of your mutation. But to make things work, we need to create a very, very simple form just to show you. I'm going to open the form tag of HTML, then on submit of it, I'm going to submit my form. And before that, I'm going to initialize my form like this. Const, open the curly braces here. You're going to use the use form hook from React Hook form. I'm going to import it like this. Import use form from React Hook form. Then I'm going to pass the to-do like this as an interface for my form. I made a mistake. The both to-do interface and the to-do React component are the same. So I'm going to change the to-do component to to-dos. Just hit F2, then change it to to-dos. Then open its file also, and then change it to to-dos instead of to-do. Then head over to your app.tsx and see if everything is working correctly. Save it. Then inside it, we're going to import the to-do here. And from this hook, I'm going to get the register and handle submit. It's not related to TanStack Query, but to make a simple form, we need to do it. And that's it. These are everything that we want from the use form hook. Then inside your form, let me just close this primary. Inside the onSubmit, I'm going to use the handle submit, this one. Then I'm going to pass my handle create to do submit here. And inside it, I'm going to create a simple input. Let me just put an H4 tag here called new to do. Then for this input, I'm going to use the placeholder of title because it is the title of our to do. Then I'm going to put register here like this. Then I'm going to register it with title. And if I copy it here like this, I'm going to change it to description. Also this one to description. I'm going to put a break tag here for better organization. Below it, again, I'm going to use another break tag. Then I'm going to use a submit input. I'm going to use the type submit for it, and that's it. If we head over to our application, we can see our simple form here. If I put a test title and a test description here, and if I click on submit query, and if I refresh my page, I can see that new to-do is added here. But there is a problem. The problem is that every time we create a new to-do, we need to refresh our page. The React is not smart enough that we create it. Then the list of our to-dos need to be updated. We need to somehow tell the TanStack Query library to update our list of to-dos after the mutation. The create to-do mutation is happened. How to do it? It's one of the main concepts and one of main features of TanStack Query library. It's very, very simple. We just need to head over to our use create to do, hit F12 on this, go straight to it. As I told you earlier, this onSettled function will always run it has an error or not. So it's a very good place to tell the TanStack Query library that we need to invalidate or refetch a query, which here is our list of to-dos because we added a new to-do. And for your information, we can get many useful things from this function, all of them. We can get same things. For example, on Settled, I have access to data, which is the thing that your mutation function returns. Or I have access to error here. This is the error that raises when your mutation fails. And another one is the input of your mutation function. For example, by convention, it's called variables. For example, you can get the input of your mutation function in the onSettled function, which can be helpful in many situations. For example, if I use variables, you can see the IntelliSense of TypeScript here, which this variable is exactly the data that we pass to our create to do function. These are very helpful things in TanStack Query library. But for simplicity, I'm going to just use the error here. I'm going to remove the variables here, and because I don't need it, I'm going to simply put an underline here. I forgot to show you something about this mutation function. If I open the console here, let me just make it a little bigger. If I open my console here, you can see after creating a to-do, you can simply see which function runs first. As you told before, the mutate here or the mutate here is going to run before the create to-do function. Success is going to run if the create to-do function is successful, and onSettled will run no matter what, no matter the state. If it's error or success, it will always run. Then close your console here. I'm going to put it here. Let's get back to where we started. At this point, the problem was that when we create a new to-do here, for example, a new to-do here, the list won't get updated and I need to refetch my page, which is not an ideal way of doing it. So on the onSettled function, I can say if there's an error, then console.log error. And otherwise, at this point, I know exactly that my query is in success state. So I put else here, open the curly braces. Then here I can invalidate or tell the TanStack query that go and again fetch this list automatically in the background. How? Above this hook here, I'm going to get the query client like this. Use query client like this. Then I'm going to import it from TanStack Query. This is a very powerful API that you can anything with your query client, cache, state, queries, mutation, and so much more. Inside our else statement, I'm going to use the query client dot invalidate queries. The syntax is like this: open the curly braces, put query key here, and inside that, I need to put a query key here. But what should I put here? If you head to the queries here, you can see that your to-dos ID's query key is to-dos. So I just need to put this to-dos key here. Don't forget to put a wait here and make this function asynchronous, because revalidating your queries, oh, sorry, I just need to put the async here. Because invalidating queries is an async operation and it might take a while to do it. So after this, if I create a new to-do, I put new to-do here for its title and description. And if I put submit here, let me just make it a little bit smaller. And as you see, the new to-do is added here without the need of refreshing the page. If again I do it, you can see that the new to-do is added here automatically. Or in other words, our list of to-dos has been updated successfully without we doing it manually, because we invalidated the to-dos key here, which is going to refetch again the list of to-dos in the background. And if it's ready, it's going to replace the old list with it seamlessly. And it has a great user experience because the user did not see any loading states till now. It's using the stale while revalidating cache strategy. It means that user will see the stale data, stale cache, until the new data is fetched in the background. Then it's going to replace the old cache with new data, and user won't see any gap between these transitions. It's a very amazing feature that makes this library amazing. To make our implementation clear, if you have noticed here, if I click on this submit query, it won't respond to the user that a new mutation is running. So we don't want our user to submit another mutation while the old one is mutating. How to solve it is pretty simple. I just need to disable my submit button when my create to the mutation is pending. It's much simple. Then I can also change the value of this input based on the state of my mutation. Create to the mutation that if it's in pending state, I'm going to put the creating text here. When it is not in pending mode, I'm going to put create to do here. Create to do. Simple. And if I again hit on this create to do, you can see the creating text there. And after that the new to do is created and the to-dos list is invalidated, it will get enabled again. If I make it smaller to see all the to-dos here, if I create on this, we can see that when it got disabled, there was no to-do at the end of this list, and when it got enabled, the to-do was added to the server and the to-dos list were updated. After creating our to-do, imagine that we want to update that single to-do. The difference between updating and creating a to-do is that when we create a to-do, we add a new item to our previous fetch to-dos list. But when we are updating a single to-do, we only need to update that single to-do instead of the whole list. It's pretty simple. Just head over to the mutations file, close it. Then we want to create another hook like this, export function, use update to do like this. Then inside it, I'm going to get my query client like this, use query client. Then again, I'm going to return use mutation hook from TanStack. I'm going to put the mutation function here, which I did not define it yet. So head over to your api.ts file here, create another function here called const update to do. Pretty straightforward. Async, I have a typo here, update to do. For the arguments of this function, I need to pass the data also. which is of type to do. Then in the curly braces, I'm going to do something which is wait Axios instance. Updating is of type put in HTTP. In my to-dos endpoint, I'm going to put the data.id, which is the ID of my to-do that I'm currently editing now. And for the data, for the body of our request, I'm going to put data here. We head over to our mutations.ts file. Then inside it, I'm going to get the data from the component and pass it through this function that I created, like this. Unsettled, I want to do something. For the arguments, I don't need the data, which is the response of my function, like this. I'm going to put underscore here because I'm not going to use it. I want error, then variables, which is the input or exactly this argument here, which is going to pass to the unsettled function on the third argument. You can call it anything. I'm going to open the curly braces here. If I have an error, I'm going to log that error. Pretty straightforward. For else clause, I'm going to invalidate the list of to-dos also and the single to-do itself, like this. Invalidate queries, query key is to do here. Then for the ID of our query, I'm going to put ID is equal to variables.id. As you can see, I get the intelligence that on this type of variables, I'm going to have check description, ID, and title exactly that we have defined here. While we put this key here, if you head over to our queries file here, then I'm going to put it side by side. As you can see, we defined each query from our useTodos hook with this key. It has an to-do here, like this, and an ID, like this. But there is a problem. Here because it's better always to put your keys inside curly braces, your dynamic keys. For example, like ID or the count and other fields. So to recap, here we are updating a to-do. After it is done, I note that the list of to-dos were updated, so I need to invalidate it. Also, my single to-do has been changed also, so I need to revalidate that single to-do also, like this. Then if we head over to our to-dos file here like this, I'm going to initialize the hook that I just created, update to-do mutation, use update to-do, like this. Now I need to create a simple handle function for updating my to-do like this. Handle update to submit, which is of type submit handler from React hook form. Then I'm going to pass my to-do here like this. Inside the callback function, I'm going to put data. And inside that function, I'm going to update to-do mutation.mutate. And I'm going to put my data here like this. It's not correct. I must do it like this. And the only field that I want to change while I'm updating my to-do is that the checked property, whether my to-do is done or not, for simplicity. I'm going to change my checked field to true. And to make it more clear, I'm going to change this function name to handle mark as done submit. You'll understand it in a second. Then if we come here after description and this span, I'm going to create another div like this. I'm going to put a button here, and on click of it, I'm going to use the handle mark as done submit function. Then I'm going to pass the data that I'm mapping over it. If we hover over this error, we see that TypeScript is throwing us this error that data might be to do or undefined. So if I go to the definition of a function, I simply need to remove this. I'm going to put an equal sign here. Then for the type of my data, I'm going to put the to do or undefined. And before submitting, I'm going to check the if data is there. Then after that, I'm going to update my to do. And if you head over to this section again, I can put a text for this button like this. If data.checked is true, I'm going to mark it as done. Otherwise, I'm going to put the label mark as done here. Then I'm going to disable this button while if the to-do is checked. Then if we head over to our application, we see that some of our to-dos are done and some of them are not, for example. And now if I put on this button here, after delay of 500 milliseconds, you see that this query is done. And the list and only this item was revalidated. In other words, it's mean that the list did not get updated and only one of these to-dos get updated. If I click on this and this, you can see it does not have a great UX because when the user clicks on this, he expects that a loading indicator or something else appear here, but for simplicity, I'm not doing it here. What if we want to delete our to-do? It must be pretty simple by this point of tutorial. If you head over to our API, we need to create another function, const delete to-do like this, async. It only gets an ID. Then inside the curly braces, I'm going to put Axios, await Axios instance dot delete my to-dos endpoint, and I'm going to put the ID here. If you head over to the mutations file, below it, I'm going to write another simple hook here like this, function use delete to do. I'm going to again initialize my query client is equal to use query client like this, and I also want to return UseMutation Hook. For mutation function, I'm going to pass the ID, which is of type number. Then I'm going to delete to do here like this. onSuccess, I'm going to log a simple console.log here. For example, deleted successfully. And for onSettled, which is also of type async, I don't want to get the response of the mutation function result. I'm going to use only the error side of it. If error, I'm going to again like the error on the console. On else clause, it's exactly the same as creating another to-do. We want to update the list of to-dos like this. Await query client dot invalidate queries. And for query key, I simply need to put to-dos key here. And that's it for our use delete to-do mutation function. Then we need to head over to our file here, const delete to-do mutation, use delete to-do here. Then if you head over down, after the mark as done button here, I'm going to put another button here with the text of delete. On click of it, I'm going to create another simple handler function for my deleting operation. Handle delete to do is equal to this function ID is going of type number. Then I'm going to simply delete my to do like this, put ID here, and if we put our handler here, handler delete, and I'm going to pass the ID here. As you can see here, the TypeScript is throwing us this error that ID might be undefined, so I just need to simply put this section in curly braces like this. If data.id was not undefined, or other words, it was defined, I'm going to return this button. Then I'm going to remove this question mark here. It again is throwing us this error. I need to put also data. And if I put an exclamation mark here, because by this point of my application, I know that the ID is always here and it's always defined. So if you head over to my application and if I click on any delete button, after a few seconds, you see that to do got deleted like this. And after that, you see that my list is going to be updated as soon as when the operation is done. Another thing that you can use here, for example, imagine that you need to do something after that this mutation is done. How to do it, how to know that this mutation is done, and how to do something after this mutation is done inside this to-dos component here. We are using the not async mode of the mutation function. If you want to use the async mode of mutation, we simply need to put async here before our function. Then I'm going to put await here, and instead of using mutate here, I'm going to use MutateAsync. And after that, if this operation is done, then I can do something else. For example, I can log success here. Or for example, I can directly change the state of another component and so much more. Just keep this in mind. Both MutateAsync and mutate are valid. Another amazing feature of this library is that we can simply handle our paginated data. We can handle easily the pagination with this amazing library. So I need to create another component here. For example, I have a list of projects that they are paginated, and in each page I have 5, 10, or even 15 projects. Create another file, another React component like this, projects.tsx. I'm going to export default function, which is called projects here. And inside it, I'm going to return projects to see everything is working. Now, if I head over to the app.tsx file, I'm going to put React fragment around it, put it here, remove the semicolon, comment it, and below it, I'm going to import the projects that I created earlier. Now, if I head over to the projects file here, I need a query that returns the list of my projects. How to do it? If you head over to the API file, then below it here, export const get projects async, and it's going to have an argument called page param or anything else, doesn't matter, which is of type page param, is of type number here. Then I'm going to get the data for my projects like this, await Axios instance dot get, which is of type project, which I didn't define it yet. Get project is an array. Let's go to the types folder, then create a file called project.ts here like this. And my project isn't a fancy thing. It's a simple interface, which I'm going to export it. Project. It has an ID and a name of type string. Then if we head over to our api.ts file, I'm gonna import it here like this. Then in my projects endpoint of my backend service, which has pagination by default, I'm going to specify the page to page, which I did a simple mistake here. We do not need this page param here for this type. For this section of our tutorial, I'm going to remove it. We need to put page here, and it is of type number, but for simplicity and for initialization, I'm going to put 1 here because I want my page be 1 if there is no data available for my page. And after that, I'm going to put another argument for my API, which is limit 3. It means that in each page, we only will get 3 projects, not more, for simplicity. And after this, I'm going to wrap this whole await here. And after that, I'm going to get the data directly from it. Then if you head over to our queries file here, I'm going to create another hook function like this, use projects, which has an argument of page, which is of type number. It's going to return a use. Inside it, we have query key, which is projects here or anything else. And also the thing that is going to change here for this query is our page number because we have pagination. So I'm going to put the page here like this. And for my query function, I'm going to use this function that I created, get projects, and I'm going to pass the page here like this. The difference between this new query, this paginated query, and other queries that we just defined earlier is that we need to use the PlaceHolderData field here like this. I'm going to explain you what is it in a second. Then I'm going to import KeepPreviousData from React Query like this. It's here. So what is this PlaceHolderData here? Imagine your user is at page 1. What happens when he wants to go to next page, to second page? The UI of the application would jump, would flicker for a second, for a small moment. Why this happens? Because the page key here has changed. What this technique helps us to do is that while the next page data is loading, it will keep the previous page data until the new data is loaded and seamlessly will get replaced by old data, and the user won't notice anything, any gap between data transitions. This happens so smoothly. So if you head over to our projects component that we just created, I'm going to initialize my page and set page state from the useState hook from React like this. After that, I'm going to use the hook that I just created there, use projects, and then I'm going to pass the page here. Don't forget to put 1 here because the initial page is 1, but for other APIs, for other points, for other services, it might be started from 0 index. I'm going to get data is pending, error, is error, is placeholder data defined, and is fetching. Then for the return of this function, I'm going to put a div here, remove these projects here. If my query is in pending state, if new page or even first page is loading, I'm going to show a loading message here like this. If there is an error here, I'm going to put another message here like this. Error is equal to error.message. Otherwise, I'm going to have my data like this. Div, and I'm going to map over my data like this. My data are my projects. Then this might be a project here. I'm going to render a simple paragraph here. Don't forget to put the type project.id. Why I don't get IntelliSense here? The problem is that in my API.ts file, I forgot to put a return here, and the problem is solved. And for the value inside this, I'm going to put project.name here. After that, I show my user the project's IDs. I'm going to show him the current page like this, current page, which is a page number. I'm going to create a simple button, and on click of it, I can go to next page like this, set page. I'm going to get the old or previous state like this, and I'm going to use JavaScript math library like this, and I'm going to get the max value between these two values, -1 and then 0. For the label of this button, I'm going to put the previous page. Very simple. I'm going to put a space here. Then I'm going to create another button, and on click of it, I'm going to put this function here. If there is no placeholder data, I'm going to set page old +1. Then I'm going to make my button disabled. Then I have placeholder data. Then I'm going to put the label next page for my button. And after that, I simply want to show the user that the query is running, is fetching new data. Is fetching is true, I'm going to return a span loading. Otherwise, I'm going to return nothing and another space in front of it. And if you look at our application here, we see that there is a problem here because instead of 3 projects, it's loading 10 projects here. I forgot to use an underline here. If I refresh my page, you can see I get first 3 projects. If I hit on next, you can see after a delay of 500 milliseconds, the new projects are loaded like this, and like this. But what happened if I go to the previous page? You can see even if the query state is unloading a state in the background, you can see, but the cache data will show us the stale data, which is a pretty amazing user experience because the user won't see any flickering, any jumps, or any loading states between paginating the data, the fetch data. But as you can see, in the background, the query is validating the correct data, which is exactly the behavior that we want. That's it for pagination in TanStack React Query. Another feature of this library is making infinite scrolling implementation much easier. I'm talking about the scroll type that you get, for example, on the Instagram or YouTube while scrolling down. And while you are scrolling down, the new data is going to fetch. If you want to implement this without using this library, it's going to have so much boilerplate code and it's going to be very hard. But with this library, this amazing feature is going to be done in a few lines of code. So let's get started. Go to your app tsx file, comment this component, then comment this import here, then put a component here called products. For example, imagine that your user is scrolling down and he's going to see products, and when he clicked on load more button or scrolled more, he's going to see more products which are getting fetched from server one by one. So go to your components folder here, then create a file called products.tsx, then export default function products here, then return products here like this to see everything is working. Then go to your app.tsx file, then import it here. So head over to your api.ts file here, create a function called export const get products like this, which is going to be of type async, and it's going to get a page param field like this, and it's going to be of type page param. Then open up the curly braces here. Inside it, I'm going to return an await here like this, await Axios instance.get a list of products like this, which I did not define this type to. I'm going to go to the types folder, create a file called product.ts. Then it's also going to be of type the project that we defined earlier, export interface product. It's going to have an ID of number, then a name of string 2. If you head over to our api.ts file, I'm going to make it bigger, import it here. It's going to get the data from the products endpoint of my backend, which you can download from the link in the description. It's going to have the page of page param +1 and with the limit of 3 products per scroll. Then I'm going to put a simple bracket around this, and then I'm going to get directly the data. If you head over to the queries file here, I can simply create the query hook like this, use products this time. Then inside it, I'm going to return, instead of use query hook, I'm going to return use infinite query hook, which I can import it from here. Then inside this options object, I'm going to put query key, which I forgot to put the curly braces here. I'm going to put the query key here, which will be going of type products here. I'm going to use the product function like this. I'm going to use the function that I just created, get products. Initial page param, it's pretty self-explanatory. For getting next page param, we have access to last page, all pages, then last page param here in the callback function. Then in the curly braces, if last page dot length is equal to 0, I'm going to return undefined. It means that there is no other pages here. Otherwise, I'm going to return last page param +1. For getting previous page param or parameter here, I have access to first page here, all pages, then first page param here. Inside this function, I'm going to check if first page param is smaller or equal to 1, then early exit with the type of undefined here. Otherwise, return first page param -1. And that's pretty much it for implementing the infinite scrolling for our query function. We did not use these values here, so we can put an underscore instead of this error go to make this error disappear. Underscore here and an underscore there. I need to put another underscore here because we only need the third argument of this callback function. If we head over to our products component here, I'm going to initialize this products query that we just defined with use products hook here. Then inside the return function, I'm going to use products query.data.pages.map, and this pages.map is going to return another array in each iteration, so we can map over those arrays also. To do this, I'm going to call this group, and I also need to get the index of this map function. Then inside it again, I'm going to again map over the group here Then I'm going to call it, then again inside this map here, sorry, I forgot to put it inside the React fragment here like this. And because we need to pass the key here, we need to use the React fragment like this and put the key index here. And again, for this, we need to use also, and inside this, we're going to button here, and I'm going to pass the product.name as a label of this button. And on click of it, I'm going to return a simple function. When user clicks on this button, I want to somehow save the ID of this product here because we're going to need it in the future. So in the above of our component, I'm going to create a simple state like this: selected product ID set selected product ID use state like this, and it might be of type number or null, and it's going to be null by default. Then inside this onClick function here, I'm going to product ID like this, set selected product ID to product.id here. I'm going to put a break here for better organization, and then I'm going to use also another fragment here, and I'm going to use the key of product.id here. Below all these fragments, I also want to add another break here. I'm going to open another div here, and inside that div, I'm going to put a button here, which I'm going to call it based on my query function conditions, products query dot is fetching next page is true, it's going to return loading more. Otherwise, if product query dot has next page is true, I'm going to return load more for my button. Otherwise, show nothing more to load. Then on the onclick of this button, I'm going to put this product query dot fetch next page, which TanStack Query will provide us by default. And I also want to disable this button while it's fetching or there is no other page. Product query dot has next page or product query dot is fetching next page like this. But why I use this selected product ID here, I just created it to show you another feature of React Query, which is getting queries conditionally or get queries based on previous queries. For example, here, I want to get my complete to-do by its ID. How to do it? I'm going to put const product query instead of products query, and I'm going to use product tool, which I did not define it yet. Again, as before, go to the api.ts file, create a function called getProduct here. Inside it, use async like the other ones. The ID is going to be of type number. And inside it, I'm going to return an await Axios instance.get is going to be of type product and is going to be get from the endpoint of products/ID. And I'm going to directly get the data here. And that's it. Go to the queries file here. Below it, I'm going to create another simple query like this. Use product ID might be number or null. Why null? Because if you head over to the products file here, we defined the ID here, number or null, because initially there is no selected product. So we have no ID. So again, as before, we're going to initialize the query. Sorry, I used the arrow function wrong here, and this equal is wrong here. Then I'm going to initialize the query client, use query client like this. I'm going to import it, return, use query here like this. Inside it, I'm going to put query key as of type product ID. Query function is going to be get product ID. The IntelliSense of TypeScript is throwing us this error that number or null is not assignable to type null, because the get product here is of type null, but the ID here that we defined may be null or maybe number. So how to solve this? We yet don't know that this ID is number or null, but we can make sure that our ID is defined by this. If we use enabled from useQueryHook like this, and if we pass our ID here and make it a Boolean value like this, or for more simplicity, put double exclamation mark behind it. So if there is an ID here and our ID is defined, it's going to return true, otherwise it's going to return false. And if this is true, then the query is enabled and active. Then this function is going to run. And by this point, we know that our ID is always defined at this point. So I'm going to put an exclamation mark here to tell TypeScript that we know that our ID is defined here. Here I want to show you a simple trick that you can increase the performance of your application by reducing unnecessary delay between loading requests. So how to do it? I'm going to use PlaceHolderData field here. I'm going to return a simple function. I'm going to define cached products here like this. And it's going to be equal to query client dot get query data, and I'm going to get the products here because if you recall, before we getting this product, we're going to have this products query in our cache. So while this product query is loading, I can show you some part of that product from this products list because we have IDs, because we have the ID of our product from the list of products, or maybe we have another fields like name, price, quantity, and many more. And while our product is loading, we can show you the part of the product loaded by products as a placeholder. It's not much that difficult to understand. We're going to make our app faster just by tweaking a little bit of things. So I know that this here is going to be of type as pages, product, undefined. Then I'm going to wrap this query client section here in parentheses. Then I'm going to put question mark dot pages dot flat to get correct cache data. I'm going to remove this S from here because it's not necessary and import it like this. So now if cached products are available and defined, I'm going to return cached products dot find item dot id is equal to id. I'm going to return item from cache products where its id is equal to the id that I'm passing to this hook from the component to this hook. Firstly, I'm going to import it. Then I'm going to put this selected product here, selected product ID here. Then below of our component, I'm going to put a simple indicator that what is going to be shown. Div selected product is going to be of type JSON.stringify product query.data. As simple as it. So if we head over to our application, we can see, firstly, we have a load more button here. If we click on it, we can see more data is loading. And when there's no data, it's going to be show us this nothing more to load from here because we know that there is no data available and TanStack Query is smart enough to know that. But why we put these products here as numbers? Because I wanted to show you something. Just pay attention carefully. If I click on this product 16 here, if you recall that our API has a 500 millisecond delay, but why this happened immediately? We can see when I click on this, I'm showing to user the whole product here. So I can expect that each of these products get at least 500 milliseconds to be fetched. But if we head over to our use product here, we see that we are getting this data here as a placeholder from our cache by query client.get query data by this key, which is our products key. So this feature enables you to do many other things and opens many possibilities for you. If I open up the Devtools here, if I click on product one, let me just make it a little bit bigger, put it on the right side here, refresh the page. If you pay attention to this product here, I'm going to click on this product. As you would see, the product was fetching because I'm going to click on another product here like this. It's going to be in fetching mode, but while it is loading, you can see immediately product is shown here. And this is another amazing feature of TanStack Query library, because you have access to the cached queries and you can manipulate them whenever you want. So that was it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, as it really helps my career on YouTube to continue. By this point of video, you have learned almost all of the concepts of TanStack Query library. We have talked about queries, mutations, invalidations, cached queries, placeholder data, infinite scrolling, paginated scrolling, Devtools, and many more. I hope you have enjoyed and learned something.